Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, AI at Work. I'm Elena Magrini, Head of Global Research at Lightcast, and I'll be your host for today's session. Today, we are going to be exploring key findings from the 2025 Stanford AI Index, which features in-depth analysis powered by Lightcast data on labor market. But before we jump in and I introduce our special guest, let's start with an audience poll. So, starting with the poll, what's the impact? What impact do you think AI will have on the labor market over the next 5 years? Mostly negative, measure disruption, mostly positive, measure opportunities and job creation, mixed impact, some job lost, others created, or limited, mostly hype, minimal real change. As you take a few seconds, a few moments to answer the poll, let me introduce our guest today, Nestor Masley. He's a research manager at Stanford Institute for Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence. And Nestor leads the AI Index and Global AI Vibrancy Tool. So it's one of the main authors behind the big Stanford AI Index that we're going to be talking about today. His work aims to make AI trends and data more accessible for policymakers, business leaders, and the broader public. And his research has been featured in the media, including the New York Times, the Financial Times, and the Guardian. And he has been working with policymakers across the world to inform the AI policy agenda. He has a wealth of experience and has been a frequent speaker on AI. And so we are very glad to have you with us today, Nestor. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, it's super exciting for me to be here. And I'm very, very, very excited to be speaking to this group. I mean, we've been working with Lightcast now for a tremendously long period of time. You guys have been one of our very early kind of data vendors. And it's been really interesting to kind of work with you guys and to see how the AI landscape is kind of changing, evolving, how it's kind of moving from one place to another. So with your data, that's something that we're able to do, and we're super grateful for that.
Thank you, Nestor. And before you explain to us a little bit more about what the Stanford AI Index is, let's take a look at the poll results. So, what impact do you think AI will have over the next 5 years? Most of the answers are on mixed, so some job lost and some others will be created. So that's positive, probably in terms of setting the scene for today. There's a mixed picture. It's not all doom and gloom, but it's not also all blue sky. Okay, let's get into the details of the session. Nestor, why don't you start by telling us a little bit more about the Stanford AI Index?
Sure. So the AI Index is an annual report that comes out of the University of Stanford, and it's currently in its 8th edition. And it's a report that really aims to track, distill, and visualize key information on trends in AI. And the report was put together in 2017 by a diverse committee of AI thought leaders, people like Jack Clark, now one of the co-founders of Anthropic, Eric Brynjolfsson, who I would say is one of the world's leading AI economists, and James Manika, who currently heads all AI research activity at Google. And these individuals got together in 2017, again, way before ChatGPT came out, because they understood as far back as then that AI was going to be a game-changing tech, and that as such, it was going to be necessary to have a report that could really tell a story about what's actually happening with this technology, right? You can't know what you don't measure. And we at the Index are in the business of measuring AI. How much better is it getting technically? How are businesses using it more? How are policymakers reacting to it? These are all things that we think about and discuss in the report at length. Of course, to make this possible, we partner with a variety of data vendors like Lightcast. They, in fact, have been one of our oldest partners. And we've been privileged over the years to have been featured in newspapers across the globe, to have been covered by governments and to have been cited by governments across the globe, and to have really brief business leaders across the globe. And to me, this is really reflective of the fact that AI as a technology is now something that's being discussed in parliaments, in boardrooms and in kitchen tables, right? Everybody has kind of a seat at this table in terms of thinking about what this technology is and what impact it has. And at the index, we want to put those people in a position to really kind of get what's going on so they can make the right decisions about it.
Yes, and it's a really comprehensive initiative. So today we will be talking about the labor market in more detail because that's what most of our audience is here for. But really, the AI index is much bigger projects, and you touch upon every single aspect of AI. So maybe let's start there. What are the top key takeaways? What are you seeing in this space?
Sure. So, I mean, I'm going to try to distill 500 pages into some top takeaways for the audience, but hopefully this doesn't stop you guys from reading the report and looking at it in greater detail. Well, I mean, I think the first big takeaway is just that the technology is getting better, right? I don't think you need someone from Stanford to tell you that, but I think it's cool to see in what ways it's gotten better. One of the exercises we do at the index is we've went to Midjourney, one of the world's leading text to image generators, and we've asked each version of Midjourney to give us a hyper realistic image of Harry Potter. And, just juxtaposing what Midjourney gave us in February of 2022 versus December in 2023, you see the tremendous progress that's been made with this technology. Now, I mean, if I actually had to hang one of these in my living room, I'd probably go with the one on the left. It looks like Pablo Picasso has drawn me a tortured and confused Harry Potter. Probably better dinner party conversation. But of course, for hyperrealism with the one on the right, you almost have to look closely to see that that is not, in fact, Daniel Radcliffe. The tech has gotten a lot better, and I think it's easy to see in those images just how much more it's improved. I think also, though, we're kind of at a moment in the ecosystem where organizations are really trying to figure out what to do with this technology. I mean, there's a lot of data that highlights how organizational usage is up. And as part of this usage, there's also more and more responsibility concerns that are coming into play. But interestingly, there seems to be a delta in most organizations between the risks that they consider to be relevant versus the risks that they're actively taking steps to mitigate. So for each of these risk vectors, whether it's cybersecurity to political stability, there is a much greater degree of organizations that report these risks as being relevant versus actually taking steps to do something about them. And I think part of that reflects just the maturity, or rather the lack of maturity in the AI ecosystem. A lot of organizations still report being tremendously early in this journey, and as a result, are not really in a position to understand what is going on, how it's developing, and aren't taking some of these RAI steps seriously. But in the absence of that, policymakers across the globe, I mean, they've really stepped up. They've demonstrated a much more significant interest in RAI. And part of the way that you've seen that is the passage of several notable RAI policymaking milestones by organizations like the OECD, like the Council of Europe, the African Union. This really here seems to be a pretty global phenomenon that is kind of involving and really getting to the table a lot of different international stakeholders on these topics. Now, I mentioned how AI is a kitchen table concern. It's not just something that parliamentarians are thinking about. What do the kitchen table discussions tell us? Well, they tell us that globally AI optimism is rising. If you look at responses to the question, do you agree that products and services using AI have more benefits than drawbacks by country? You'll notice that for virtually every single country in the sample, there is a much greater proportion of people that now say that they agree with that statement than disagree. And the countries that have seen the sharpest uptick have been those countries like Germany, France, United States, Canada, these Western nations that historically were quite negative about the tech. Still, they are kind of very far behind other countries like China, Indonesia, and Saudi Arabia when it comes to optimism. And I think this is a very important question for us to consider. I mean, kind of acknowledging that the different perspectives and the different opinions that people have regarding this technology are going to be really, really important, kind of shaping how it develops and how it changes over time. Now, another big story, and this is really, I think, ties into increasing business engagement with the tech. I mean, AI is just becoming a lot more efficient, affordable, and accessible. This chart is looking at how expensive it is to use AI systems at a select level of intelligence. The line on the left, the blue one, is, for example, looking at how much it costs to use a model that has the intelligence level of GPT 3.5, the initial model upon which ChatGPT was built. And you'll notice that you basically go from systems that cost roughly $20 per million tokens in November of 2022 to 7 cents per million token in November of 2024. In 2 years, you go from $20 to 7 cents. And this isn't just a phenomenon that you see for lower, less intelligent models. You see this phenomenon as well for models at the level of intelligence of GPT-4 or GPT-4o. So across the board, these systems are getting cheaper, and cheaper systems typically mean greater levels of economic integration. Now, unfortunately, this is still a system and still a space that is very dominated by industry. If you look at the number of notable AI models by sector, there are more and more models that come from industrial labs like OpenAI, Anthropic, and Google. And academia is really lagging behind in this race, largely because there are just massive computational bills that are associated with training and developing these systems. So those are some of the general trends that we see. And I think, generally for me, in a lot of ways, the kind of big thesis that I see with the AI index is that we've kind of now moved away from this technology being something that's just in the lab. It's something that is in all of our lives, and something that, again, business leaders are reacting to, policymakers are reacting to, people are reacting to, and you see that reaction in varied ways across the world.
Yes, so it's not an abstract concept anymore. It's just really happening right now. We are
Yeah,
seeing it
absolutely.
in every aspect
Absolutely.
of our life. We before we go into the next section, we have a question, but that reminds me that please do send questions if you have any on the topics that we're covering today in the Q&A section of the chat, and we will endeavor to answer them throughout the presentation. And so for the first questions that we have, Nestor, is can you speak to which trends will have the most overt impact on your average person that is not currently being talked about in the media?
I think probably one of the biggest trends is I think these systems are going to become a lot more usable, right? So I think that whenever new technologies are introduced, it's not always about the raw technology, but how do you actually design an interface that humans can interact with? And I mean, if you think about AI, most people know it as a chatbot, and you can do a lot with a chatbot. You can imagine that if we have agentic interfaces or interfaces that are a bit more kind of seamless and smooth, that it's going to be a lot easier to use the tech. And I feel that people generally don't talk about that as much. The dialogue tends to be about the new models and the new technology, but there's also a lot of exciting developments that are happening on the interface frontier. And that's something that I think is really worth paying attention to.
Yes, and actually related to that, I had another question. I feel privileged as moderator to be able to ask you a question, but what do you think are the biggest challenges and threats related to AI that we're going to see in the next few years?
I think that, I mean, it depends who you speak to. I think there's a lot of differing kind of opinions on this one. I mean, I think for me, there is a lot that these systems can do, and there's a lot that they cannot do. You could talk about like existential risk, broader safety concerns. I think for this audience, I would kind of say that there's a lot of concerns that surround, I think, businesses perhaps not necessarily over investing in the technology, but getting a bit too excited about it and maybe using it without thinking about the proper guardrails. There's a lot of examples of companies like Air Canada that have lost in court because they've rolled out chatbots that have recommended things that are actually not in line with their policies. So I think that there is risks that comes with using this system and trusting it blindly and not really being cognizant of what it can do and what it cannot do.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And I think there's still a lot that we need to figure out in the ways that we are using these tools effectively. There are a few other questions that are coming into the chat. A few of them are related to industry and education, so we're going to cover them in the next section. But I'll take one last one before we move on, which is what are your thoughts on AI agent and its impact on people's role in the short and midterm?
I think that AI agents, I mean, they're getting better, but I think if you look at the research and we cover some of this in the index, the data suggests that in situations where there are short time budgets, so for example, if you give agents like 4 hours to do something and humans to do something, agents will marginally outperform humans, but both agents and humans in those settings don't do super well. But when you increase the time budget, then humans outperform agents by quite massive margins. And I think part of this, and this again kind of ties into my previous answer about like a usability interface, right? Where, there's a lot of there's a lot of like fluid and flexible thought that humans need to engage in when they do some of these kind of more agentic tasks, right? So, as an example, I'm going to be in Berlin in a few weeks. I'm giving a talk there, and I needed to book a hotel for myself. This is something that I was doing earlier in the day. Now, there's a lot of things that I'm thinking about as I'm booking this hotel, right? Like, it needs to be close to the train station because I need to leave the talk and go grab a train to go do another talk. I don't want to pay an exorbitant fee for this hotel, but like probably in my mind, maybe there's some higher fee I'm willing to pay if it is next to the train station, right? And it's these kinds of little things that you know, I don't need to vocalize that. I saw a hotel, I saw a price, and right away I booked it because I knew that that's what I wanted to do. Even the act of me talking about it now, imagine explaining that to an AI system. I probably AI systems wouldn't be able to kind of execute on that in a very kind of clean way. But even the act of kind of talking is, you know, it would take me a lot longer to explain it than to just do it myself. And I think for us to get really effective agents, the inverse has to be true, where there has to be that ability to kind of anticipate some of these tasks and some of these points. And it's not to say that we won't get there, but I think we're more far away from it than perhaps we think.
Yeah, and I think that actually fits very nicely on some of the discussion that we hear in the labor market space about what type of roles will be replaced by AI,
Yeah.
and the whole discussion about whether it is the junior roles or more the managerial ones. And there's pros and cons for both discussions. But perhaps on that point, let's move on, and we will continue to answer your questions throughout the session. But let's move on into your top key findings for industry and labor markets.
Absolutely. So, I mean, this is a very important chapter for us, and I think it kind of speaks to a lot of thoughts that people have and questions that people have. I think one of the first things that I see is that there's really been a massive increase in generative AI funding. So, we go from roughly, I think, $4 billion in generative AI investment in 2022 to close to 34 billion in 2024. There have been certain places like the United States that have really widened their lead in global private AI investments. So they really outpace other areas like Europe and China as centers of AI investments. And interestingly enough, as well, the use of AI is also climbing to rather unprecedented levels. So if you look at, for example, the share of respondents who say that their organizations are using AI in at least one function, we go from roughly 20% in 2017 to a fairly massive spike of 80% in 2024, with a massive jump in the last little while. Now, again, a lot of these organizations are still very kind of immature in their generative AI rollout, but they're starting to think about this tech, and it's something that's really kind of impacting their bottom line in a very tangible way. And part of the reason is I think that there is now a lot of studies that have come from the academy that really do suggest that AI boosts productivity and it bridges skill gaps. So you see this, for example, in customer support agent settings where customer support agents that use AI are much more productive than those that don't. You see this in studies in consulting, finance, law, computer science. We cite them all in the index. AI is associated with positive productivity impacts. And that's something that the data does really tell us, and something that a lot of businesses are very keenly aware of. On that point as well, a lot of these studies actually do seem to suggest that AI has productivity equalizing effects, where if you juxtapose kind of the delta between the impact that AI has on low versus high skilled workers, it really seems to be the low skilled workers that increase their performance a lot more than the high skilled workers. Now, in most of these studies, the high skilled workers at the end still outperform the low skilled ones, but the gap narrows. And if AI is going to be a tool that is going to really narrow the gap in productivity, that could have really massive effects for the labor market and the economy. And with that, I'll kind of hand it over to you, Elena, to maybe speak to some of the specific highlights as they relate to some of the Lightcast data that we feature in the report.
Yes, so let's start from where you ended. Like there are different impacts on the labor market, and we are going to see them across different type of roles, but also across different type of sectors, and for sure also across different type of countries. And so one of the things that we did in the first type of analysis together was to look at how demand for AI is changing over time across different nations. And overall, there is broadly a positive trend where demand for jobs related to AI seems to be on the rise. But actually, the take up is still uneven across countries. So we have Singapore that's leading the way. They have invested a lot in AI around 2020 and 2021, and they have a spike. And now they're kind of like moving in a similar direction to the rest of the labor market, but still further ahead. And then we have other countries that have a different trajectory of adoption. So demand is growing more or less in different countries, but at different pace. We have the United States, where approximately 2% of job postings explicitly mention AI skills. And then we see that European countries mostly lag a little bit behind. So again, there's an international perspective, and different countries are on different trajectories. But it's not just that the trajectories in the job market are different, but the type of AI skills that are needed is varied. So we tend to talk about AI as one big block of one unique topic, but in reality, there are many different elements to AI, and therefore the type of skills that are being required are also varied. And we have group of skills related to artificial intelligence and machine learning, for example. They're much more in demand overall than many of the other cluster of skills related to AI. But as you mentioned, it's not just that investment in generative AI is rapidly increasing. We are also seeing demand for jobs requiring generative AI skills rapidly increasing. So you might need to be eagle-eyed on this graph, but basically up until 2023, there was basically no demand for generative AI, and then 2023 and 2024, demand for this type of skills shot up. And so that's also really important. Perhaps also we can touch upon it later in the discussion about higher education and what type of skills we need. But the third slide I wanted to show you in terms of AI and the labor market is around the impact of AI on different industries. And here there are two things to be said. Of course, information and communication, so the IT sector is the sector where demand for AI is the highest. And that makes sense because that's kind of like where AI is born as a tool, as a technology. But what we're also seeing is that AI is rapidly rising right across industries, right across the labor market. So it is no longer something that is being developed and taught by in a specific segment of the labor market. It is something that is spreading right across. And that's part of the reason why we hear about it at the kitchen table, because it's something that starts affecting every part of our life. So these are some of the key findings in terms of labor market. Before we open up to the question, I wanted to pause for a moment to explain, at least in terms of the labor market data that we showed you from Lightcast, how this data is built and how these data points are created. A lot of the insights, all the insights that I've showed you right now and that features in the Stanford AI Index are based on job postings data. This is our own proprietary data set with 2.5 billion current and historical job postings that have been collected since 2010. And we have data for across over 150 countries. We use this data set that is big and noisy, and we overlay it with taxonomies that are ways to classify data and make it simple to be able to transform these data points into insights. One of the use cases is around artificial intelligence, as we did, but we also look more broadly at other trends in the labor market, such as the change in demand for all the skills in the labor market, not just AI, but also changes in the labor market in terms of demographic trends and talent shortages. Now, let's move into the Q&A because I've seen quite a few questions popping in. Before we do that, we have a second poll. So let's look at that. Let's take a peek and let's see your answers. We have given you a little bit of an overview of some of the topics that are in the Stanford AI Index, some of the work we are doing at Lightcast, but there are a lot of questions around AI. So the question here is what you would be most interested in exploring next when it comes to AI and the labor market, with some options being how AI and humans can work together, how AI is impacting non-tech sectors and roles, how AI demand compares to supply in different parts of the US and the world, and then strategies for upskilling, reskilling existing workers. Now, while you answer the poll, let's read some question. First one is around higher education. So, Nestor, how can higher education institutions prepare their students for working with AI and also develop AI courses for their job market?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is just a matter of, I would call, like, building AI fluency, if that makes sense, right? So I think there's a really good kind of quote from Eric Brynjolfsson, one of AI thought leaders that we like to work with at the Index, and he has a really good line where he kind of says that, it's going to be the managers that know how to use AI that are going to replace the people that don't actually know how to use AI, right? So it's less about the fact that, like, you need to be a computer scientist. You just need to understand what is at stake with this technology, how to use it, how to build with it, what kind of things matter, and in general, what ways in which you could potentially use it in your job. Now, I think I would kind of challenge, not like push back against that kind of assumption, but say in response to the question that in some ways it's not completely about what can schools do. Obviously, schools need to kind of do these things. But I mean, if we're going to be moving in a world where job taxonomies are changing very quickly, a lot of us are going to be going to school, probably studying one thing, and then at some point in the future, pivoting perhaps to something else, right? And we need to find a way to kind of very quickly on the job learn how to do new skills and learn how to talk about different points. And, there's a lot of different ways to kind of do that. So, you could do that through kind of resources like, the AI index. I think that's kind of very valuable. That's something that could be useful. I'm deeply passionate about this issue actually quite a bit. And like one of the startups that I work with, I mean, I'll kind of plug them right now and share a link in the chat, but they're this startup called Thinking Through AI, and they're called Readocracy, but they've kind of launched a product called Thinking Through AI, where they basically, the kind of entire premise of this is kind of like a tool that professionals can use to keep up to date with kind of AI related content, right? So I think that the task is we're going to have to keep up with technology. But historically, I think we haven't always been good at retraining people to do different things. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of labor economists on this call, and that's not something that I think I need to explain to you guys. So I think theoretically it's easy to know what to do, but the devil's in the details.
Yeah, and I think you touched on the point of we need to monitor all these changes because they're happening so fast, and then we also trying to understand how we implement these changes in the education system, but also in companies. And actually, on that point, we are going to touch upon later, but we are actually working on a whole new research paper and tools precisely focused on the
Very
practicalities
nice.
of it. So, what does it mean for educators? What does it mean for L&D? Another question very similar to this one, but this time specifically focused on at-risk first-gen students. The question says, as AI adoption grows and education gaps widen, how can higher education, especially community colleges, equip at-risk and first-generation students for success in an AI-driven workforce?
Yeah, I think it's same answer. It mostly kind of comes down to education, right? I think the where it's about you need to teach people to kind of embrace the technology. And I think, I do a lot of consulting and advising with businesses. And one of the first things that I tell them is kind of, accept the facts that AI is here. If you accept that it's here and make it a part of your kind of educational process, much like we learn history, math, English, and a variety of other subjects, then you're going to be much better equipped than someone that doesn't do that. So I think to me, it always starts with education.
Yes. Okay, let's move to some other different questions. So we have one that says, well, we talked a lot about the industries that are going to be most affected, but there's a question that goes, which industry do you think will be least impacted by AI?
It's a good question. I mean, I think industries that have like very that kind of rely on human built characteristics. So, for example, what is coming to mind to me is like sport and entertainment, right? Like, we have robots that can do a lot of sporting functions, but that can probably like kick a soccer ball faster than any other or more powerfully than any other human. But there's something about engaging with humans that we find to be very meaningful. At a similar token, I could imagine that a lot of these kinds of jobs that rely on human to human engagements, I think are still going to have a premium. I mean, like AI can definitely help students with teaching. AI could definitely help therapists, but I think part of the exercise of teaching and even doing therapy is to just engage with another human. So, and I think it's still very tricky to like create these systems that, you know, have that kind of human effect, right? Like, when you're talking to ChatGPT that it's not another human, and it can maybe substitute the role of a friend, but it's not going to give you that same kind of impact. So I think those types of jobs and industries that are focused on that human connection are going to be well guarded.
Yes, and on that one, we've been looking a little bit into this, and we're totally on the same page. The sectors where there is heavy human interactions are the ones that are going to be most safeguarded. That is not to say that there won't be elements of the jobs that will be aided by AI, but it's just that the human element of it will continue to be the most important element in those sectors and industries. Similar but a bit different question. Can effects on the labor market be observed yet? Do you expect to see bigger impacts in the near future? Will this be contingent upon the development of agentic tools like the ones you've alluded before?
Yeah, I'd be curious to get your opinion on this as well, Elena. But I think that for me, I haven't seen a lot of good tangible data that looks at like how many jobs have been lost or like how many jobs have been reskilled. I mean, I know anecdotes of like either some business managers being like, well, we're using it, like our software engineers are using AI. And you know what? We're busier than ever because we're now pursuing all these projects we didn't even have time to do before. We're actually hiring more. Whereas there's other anecdotes of like the Duolingo CEO, I think a few days ago, saying that they're cutting all contractors and replacing them with AI. So I think you get different narratives. And I haven't seen some tangible data, but it kind of speaks to the need of like certain types of projects that we feel actually should be pursued and should be analyzed.
I actually agree. I think a lot of the research at the moment is focused on what will happen in the future, and we're all seeing like different models about what is AI exposure by industries, by occupations, but we haven't seen much yet in terms of what's happened in the last few years. And especially around one of the areas that we want answer to, I think everybody wants answer to, is about the fact whether AI is causing layoff or
Yeah,
not.
exactly.
And so yeah, it'd be interesting to see more research in that space. And actually, question related to this I see in the chat is, as AI increasingly automates admin tasks and office support tasks, what is the projected impact on entry level low skills roles, and how should the workforce organization and individuals adapt to remain employable and relevant? So I guess we touched on the first part. We don't know much about the impact, but how can we make sure we stay relevant?
I think that beyond kind of teaching people how to use the technology, so again, kind of harping back on the point with AI education, I think it's also having the right incentives for businesses. I mean, if you look at, for example, the US tax code, I believe in the US that labor assets are taxed at a much higher rate than capital assets. So a lot of businesses have incentives to hold on to capital in lieu of labor, just from an economic perspective. So, if there are certain parameters like that, then businesses might have reason to kind of automate away certain functions, right? So I think one big thing is actually kind of getting businesses to buy into the idea that it is worthwhile to kind of keep humans around to do different things. And I mean, I absolutely think it makes sense from a business perspective, but I think you need to kind of get that philosophy across and really make it like a core fundamental principle that governs the way a lot of different businesses work and operate.
Yes, absolutely. Next question. You were talking about employers and what they should be doing. The question is, with AI evolving so rapidly, how should employers think about effectively communicating with education and training providers? So, how should the ecosystem change to make sure that everyone is future ready?
I mean, I think if I was kind of this, like if I was basically running a company, what I would do, I think, is twofold. I think like one is you need to train the executives and the high level managers to kind of have AI fluency, right? Because the reality is that you're going to be needing to make decisions about this technology, probably tomorrow. And you don't want to be in a position where you don't understand the stakes of the game. And it's not even about, you don't need to know how to build this model, but you need to know, like, given what my organization is trying to do, what model should we build with? What should we prioritize? Should we prioritize latency? Should we prioritize, out of box performance? Can we fine tune a model on data that we have? Do we have data that's clean, that is accessible, right? These are all questions that you need to know how to navigate, and that requires education. So, I mean, this is something, again, I do with a lot of businesses, but, in a 1 day workshop or a 1 week workshop, you could easily learn all the kind of key concepts that you need to know to make the right decisions, because AI is going to require different decisions for different organizations to make. And you just need to know what's at stake when you make that decision. So I think one level is kind of teaching the managers and executives. The other is, I think, getting the regular employees to buy in. And this is, I think, a bit more challenging, because here the issue is that, if you're a big company that has thousands of employees, you can't really afford, in a lot of cases, personalized executive or individual education on these AI topics. That's part of the reason I like working with these companies like Readocracy and thinking through AI, because they buy into this belief that we need to reskill, we need to work to make things better, and we need to make it very, let's say, cost effective to do that re-education. And I think that kind of dual philosophy and dual approach is the way in which I would kind of encourage organizations to go about doing it.
Yeah, and I'm gonna ask you in a moment another question related to this. Before doing that, I would add a third point maybe that is around, and this is not just for AI, but just in general in a fast-pacing labor market, is around we need better connection between industry and education. So
Yes,
we just need the two of them to sit at the same table and discuss these topics together as they come up, rather than having this disconnect between the two different parts.
absolutely.
Going back though to your last point you were making about the skills, there was one question that was asking more in general. We talked about the AI skills that are needed for the future, but what are the other skills that are also going to be relevant in an AI future world?
I mean, I think a lot of human skills, right? Like, humans, it is a human world, and there are certain things that humans are really well suited to do that AI systems cannot really do, right? Kind of negotiation, sales, trust, right? You might have an AI agent that is way smarter than any individual human, but I don't know how many organizations would feel comfortable buying and selling from an AI system. So, we still very much live in a human to human world, and those kind of interpersonal human skills, I still think, are going to have a lot of relevance and value in the future.
Yes, and actually it's something that we also see in the data. So these are type of skills that are continuing to increase, and some of them in particular, like for example around critical thinking and flexibilities, are also increasingly being mentioned in job postings, maybe in a way that we didn't see a few years ago.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not to say they were not important a few years ago, but they're becoming even more important now. Um, Also, kind of related to how you answered the previous question about educating the executives in terms of the knowledge of AI, there's another question about information in the age of AI, which goes, I sense we are on the verge of an information age shift where the way we interact with information and knowledge shifts. How do you see AI evolving the way we acquire and apply knowledge versus how do we do it today?
It's a good question. I mean, I think one of the big challenges is going to be in organizations. How do you ensure that you have enough knowledge to use this AI technology to do things well? So, I mean, we kind of all accept that AI is here. It's going to be a big part of the future. That's what the data tells us. I look at myself. I mean, I use AI on a daily basis, but in some ways, I almost feel lucky because I went to school before AI and I kind of learned the things I needed to do the hard way. And now I have the knowledge and I can use AI well. You know, if you're 15, you know, you might be too lazy to do I mean, I was lazy when I was 15, right? Like if you have a tool like AI, you're going to use that instead. So, I think that's a challenge. You know, similarly in organizations, right? Like if all your junior developers are just using AI, you know, do they run into a world in which they kind of lose a lot of these intangible kind of coding knowledge that can turn them into valuable senior developers? I mean, that's an anxiety a lot of businesses have. We'll see to what degree it kind of bears itself out. I mean, if you look at other kind of human technological revolutions or maybe tools like the calculator, right? You know, we don't really emphasize long division as much or long multiplication because the calculator has done that. We found a way to adapt, but AI is a bit of a different beast than the calculator. So again, this is one of those things we don't really know, and we're going to have to continue kind of keeping an open eye on this particular question and point.
Yeah, there's still a lot of unknowns. Moving to a slightly different topic, there's a few questions around ethical AI. So, what considerations do you believe are most important when it comes to the ethical use of AI?
I think for me, it depends who you ask. It's a very broad question. It's a great question, but a very broad one. I mean, I generally think when you think about ethical AI, you need to think about issues regarding transparency and explainability, issues around security and safety, privacy and data governance, as well as fairness and bias. Those to me are kind of the big categories. But these issues are going to matter to different stakeholders in different organizations in different kinds of ways. For example, if you're building an algorithm that maybe makes decisions on whether you should approve people for loans, then I think that algorithm needs to be very explainable and transparent. You need to understand how it makes the decisions that it makes. Whereas if you're a business that is maybe just building a chatbot that recommends different things to different people, you want to ensure that that chatbot is fair and unbiased. That, you know, if it knows, for example, that it's talking to a black woman versus a white man, it doesn't bias responses in any particular way. So I think there are broad categories of what ethical issues we should consider and think about. But the specific ones that come to mind, I think, really are kind of contingent on the functions that individual organizations are thinking about or actually doing.
Yeah, and actually, on that point, actually, this year, for the first time in the index, we've included a group of skills related to ethical AI and
Mm,
considerations and regulations, which is, again, something that did a little bit like generative AI I was describing earlier. So, generative AI, we don't see much demand for skills for generative AI up until 2023, and then it shows up. And
yeah,
then ethical regulations, skills related to ethical AI and regulations are doing something similar. Maybe this year was the first year where we started to see them. Maybe when we are here next time, and this time next year, we're going to see even more demand for those type of skills.
yeah, absolutely.
Um, okay, let's take a pause for a moment from questions and let's look at the poll results. So, what type of research would you be most interested in? Okay, so everyone is on the practical side. So, we want to know about strategies for upskilling and retraining. So, perhaps we can focus a little bit more on these type of questions in the second half of this Q&A. And I believe the third poll has gone out in the chat. So, do take a peek. Okay, a couple more questions. So, There's a few around junior roles. So, if junior roles are benefiting from AI, from a training and education perspective, does that mean we should target junior roles versus more experienced when it comes to education and AI?
That's a good question. I don't think so. I mean, I think everybody can benefit. I mean, I think it's kind of still unclear, like, most of the studies seem to be kind of thinking about the fact that AI does seem to have greater impacts on lower level people than higher level people, but that doesn't necessarily seem to be the case across every single study. So I generally think no. I mean, I think that it might be task specific, but I think that people across the stack can kind of benefit from AI education and kind of upskilling to different degrees.
Yeah, and actually, on that one, this is something that we are looking into as part of the new research I mentioned earlier. We are trying to look at different job functions and what type of roles are being affected by AI. And it's actually not always straightforward, the split. So, in some roles, we are seeing that it is the managerial positions that are most likely to require AI skills. And that's because these skills are used to change the strategic picture and support with the strategic view of the company. And that's, for example, in the case of marketing. Whereas, for example, in HR functions, we see a lot of the more junior roles requiring AI skills. So again, I think it's a little bit more complicated, and different parts of the labor markets are probably responding to these changes in different ways. Um, Okay, now we have a technical one. I'll take and respond very quickly. How do you define AI jobs, AI job postings in the report? So the way the analysis is built is we have built a list of AI skills that we are seeing as being requested in the labor market. This is a list of over 300 different skills that touch upon different aspects of AI, such as machine learning, generative AI, ethics, robotics, autonomous driving, and any job postings that mention one of these skills is captured as an AI posting. And then we track the evolution over time of these type of jobs. And if you'd like to know more about this methodology, you can get in touch with us after the webinar. But also, if you are a Lightcast customer and you have access to analyst, there is the possibility of using the same methodology in our tool. You have the option to select the AI sector, and that is the same definition that we've used in the report. All right. Okay, this is a little bit more of a technical question. For a job seeker who doesn't have deep knowledge in AI, such as machine learning, will they be able to land roles with end user knowledge?
Yeah, I mean, I think so, right? I think that for me, AI isn't a product as much as it is like a source of energy, right? It's kind of like someone 150 years ago said, "Here's electricity, figure out what to do with it." Now, depending on the wiring that you built, you can do different things with electricity. You could use it to charge a laptop, you could use it to power lights, you could use it to cool food. AI can do so many different things, and organizations have to figure out how to build that wiring. Now, we're in a world in which, fortunately, to use AI, you don't really have to understand how it works. Obviously, it helps to know, what a transformer is or how these systems think, but you don't need that kind of technical knowledge to build these systems, or in a lot of cases, to make decisions about how to deploy them. At some point you do probably need to get some technical people involved in the decision making process. But if you're a researcher, there's ways you could be using AI today. I mean, I guarantee you that every person in the call, there are ways that you could probably leverage AI without having to be super technical to do work in a better and a more effective way. So it's just kind of absolutely thinking about the fact that those tools could definitely be used in that kind of fashion.
Yes, thank you, Nestor. There are still a lot of questions, but I think we need to start wrapping up and showing a little bit a few of the projects that we have coming up that may be actually helping answer some of these questions. And so for the first thing first, you can find the link to the Stanford AI research that we've discussed today at this QR code. And I know it has also been shared in the chat, so make sure
Yeah,
to check it out.
I'll also add it in the chat one more time as well.
Okay, great. Thank you, Nestor. And then I wanted to talk to you about other resources that we have on AI. First one of which is the Lightcast Global AI Skills Outlook, which builds on the work and the methodology that we are using in the Stanford report to provide a global view of trends in the labor markets, looking at insights on the impact of AI by skills, by occupations, and by geographies, and includes insights on the type of skills and occupations, both technical and non-technical, most affected by AI across over 15 countries, with practical implications for enterprise, educators, and governments. We One of the questions that was in the chat was around how is demand for skills changing more in general. On that, we have done a whole series of reports in the last few months under the campaign of the speed of skill change. What we did was we tried to look and map at the change in the type of skills requirements by occupation, try to quantify this change, and try to understand which are the parts of the labor market that are changing the fastest and what do they need for ensuring that workers continue to be future ready. We have a US version of that report, and we also have a UK version of that report, and links to specific policies in the two countries. So make sure to check those out as well. As well as if you'd like to find out more about Lightcast research collaborations with institutions such as Stanford, the Stanford colleagues, but also the OECD, UNESCO, the World Bank, and many other international organizations. You can find them on our website at this page. And then lastly, one of the things I wanted to draw your attention to is our upcoming research on AI. And the idea of this research space is to go beyond the buzz. So we don't want to tell you something that you've already seen in the media. We want to tell you something that you can use in your day-to-day if you are an educator to adapt the curriculum and adapt provision. And if you're working in HR and L&D specifically, we want to give you tangible tools that you can use to help your workers right across your companies to upskill and be future ready. So this report is coming up in July. So make sure that you can sign up to our website to receive updates on the report as soon as it comes out. That brings us to the close. So, Nestor, thank you so much for joining me today. It was really great to hear your insights. I'd love for you to have like a 1-2 minutes concluding remarks on the discussion.
Yeah, it was an honor to be here today. I thought the questions were really top notch. Yeah, I think for me, it's kind of reiterating some of the points we have already said, that AI is no longer a tool in the lab. It's a tool that's here. It's a tool that's in all of our lives. And ultimately, the ways in which technologies get rolled out, I think in a lot of cases has less to do about the tech itself and more about how we react to it. So I would encourage everybody leaving this call to kind of think about, what is important for them in the kind of AI future that we're encountering, and to kind of leave thinking that they could be kind of active citizens in building the next kind of wave of this technology and kind of shaping how it develops, whether it's teaching your kids how to use it well or using it at work. Shape that discussion. And that's kind of a call to action I want to leave people with.
Yeah, I love that call to action. And it's something that I often think about when I do research on AI. At the end of the day, it's up to us. We have a role to play in how we are shaping this discussion. So it was really great to have all your questions today and all your feedback also in the polls. So that was very much appreciated. Nestor, thank you so much for all the insights that you shared with us. And for those of you who had questions and we didn't manage to get to them, somebody from Lightcast will reach out. We will also make sure that we'll share the slide deck and the recording of today's presentation. So if you want to rewatch it or share it with your audience, feel free to do so. But for now, thank you so much. And we're going to bring this to a close. Thank
Thank
you.
you very much, guys. Bye.